Welcome to this week's episode of the Prep Athletics Podcast, and I couldn't be more happy to have Chris Herren on as our guest today. Now, Chris, as you might know, was on, my opinion, the best 30 for 30 that ESPN ever made, called Unguarded. And it talks about his basketball career, but it also talked about him, delving into drugs and alcohol at the peak of his career, to include playing, high during his NBA career. And wanted to have Chris on for a long time because our main audience here is parents and players, and just want to make sure that, there's a lot of drugs, alcohol, peer pressure out there. Chris has seen it and done it. And he now talks to youth all over the world, mostly the U.S., but all over the world about, his story, what to avoid, tips for parents. And he's even opened his own recovery center in Massachusetts to help people who are struggling with this. We also started out talking about, when I was at Air Force, we played against Fresno State. And in that 30 for 30, there's a highlight where the best man at my wedding, Dylan Pope, gets the ball stolen from him, and Chris gets it and slams it. And we're going to put a picture in the video of, we sent this mug to a lot of friends and family. And if you're listening right now and can't see it, just know I got a mug made that shows the screenshots of my good friend Dylan getting the ball taken from him, and then Chris Herren dunking. So we sent that out to family and friends. We all took funny pictures and made a book for Dylan. And the last picture in that book is actually Chris Herren holding this mug, dunking a donut in it. So Chris helped us out a couple years ago with this fun little thing we did for our buddy. And we chat about that at the beginning too. But if you have any questions on this, go to chrisherren.com. He's got a lot of resources. If you're struggling, if you know someone that's struggling with drugs or alcohol, it's out there now. Vaping too. We talk about that a little bit and how that's kind of insidious. But anyway, great episode. It's a short one today, but very powerful. A lot of good lessons, and I hope you enjoy it. So thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast with Chris Herren. Welcome to the Prep Athletics Podcast. This is Corey Heights.
Some battles. I'm not sure if they got us. If they did, maybe.
So you will get better as a player during that year.
So it was kind of exciting. Like, oh yeah, somebody wants me.
Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Real quick story. We played against you when I was at Air Force back in the day, and my best man at my wedding, at one of the games they played against you, got the ball stolen, and you went up and slammed it. This is at Fresno State, and that happened to be caught in your 30 for 30 documentary, Unguarded. So what we did is we had a mug made of the scenes from this happening, and then we got a bunch of pictures of his families and friends taking pictures of this mug, and we made a book for him. And the last page of that book was you dunking a donut into this.
Yeah,
It was just a cherry on top. So I was watching the documentary on the couch, saw my best friend get dunked on, and it was just it made me so happy. So anyway, thanks for creating joy. And Dylan's listening now. So Dylan, thank you for being a part of this.
Thanks for bringing me in.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Well, look, one thing I want to talk about today first is, our big audience right here are parents of high school players and high school players, right? That's our audience right here. And obviously you've been sharing your story and talking to high schoolers across the country about addiction, recovery, what that looks like. And it's now November 2024, Chris. You've been to all these high schools over the past few years. What's the trend you're seeing? Are kids drinking and doing drugs more? Is it about the same? Is it less with everything going on? What's the zeitgeist right now around that?
I think it varies, right? I think it varies in communities. I think, I could be in the middle of the Midwest and huge substance use. And inner city schools where primarily drinking alcohol is the substance, of choice. Do I feel like it's slowed down? I think it's slowed down somewhat since I started doing this. I do. I think just the awareness and the education and the support that's been presented to kids over the last decade. And I also seen a shift in, the harder drugs, right? From the Percocets and the painkillers and the opiates and fentanyl, where 5, 6, 8 years ago, I was walking into schools and meeting kids who were dependent on, heroin and fentanyl. And now that's kind of shifted somewhat. Unfortunately, what happens is we do so much work around that, and we educate and we kind of operate from a place of fear, and yet other substances kind of find their way in.
Yeah, and the fentanyl and just one little dose of it and the wrong thing, and it can be over with, which is scary. Let me ask you about that too. So you're seeing and talking to families that are addicted. You've got some recovery centers now out there. Help me on this. If you're a family and you've got a member of your family addicted to one of these substances, how do you support that? I mean, I know there's books written on this. It's a lot more than just a quick answer, but like, when do you know to let someone go to rock bottom, or when do you enable them? Like, what balance do you advise families on taking when one of their loved ones is struggling with it?
I just think enabling is right. It's not cookie cutter, right? Certain families can handle certain amounts of struggle and pain and working with their loved one who suffers from addiction, and others pay an ultimate price, right? I can say from my perspective, I have family members who struggle primarily with alcohol, one being my father. And what recovery has done for me over the years, it's kind of taught me how to love from a distance with him. It's okay. You don't have to be in the trenches with them at all times. And with my father, it's always about supporting recovery and not supporting addiction. So I'm very careful with that, because I've seen parents who completely unplug and walk away and kids die. And I've seen parents stay very close and connected and supporting, and they pass away too, right? So I believe it's a very personal journey on how much your emotional health can withstand going through that process with the person you love.
Yeah, and that's a frustrating answer because families want, a prescription of, hey, do this and you'll get this outcome. But yeah, with every situation being different, that's a challenge.
Yeah, and I say that all the time. Like, to me, the scariest thing, especially being a parent, right? The scariest thing about addiction is nobody knows who has it, right? Like, nobody knows when we're 16 years old what life's going to be like at 24. Nobody knows when we're 21 what life's going to be like at 32. And, as a parent, you don't know. You don't know if your kid's the one that's going to struggle with substance use. You don't know if your child's going to battle addiction. But I'll tell you this, doing this for as long as I've done it, and the amount of families that send their kids to my center, most moms and dads, most loved ones, if they had an opportunity, they would do it differently. They wouldn't be they would stay on top of it a little more and not kind of wave the surrender flag and say, okay, you're a kid, go out and do what kids do. That's unfortunately, I feel like we've given up on that. I don't think kids at 15, 16 years old need to start experimenting with drugs or getting drunk on Fridays and Saturday nights. I just don't see the point of it.
All right. So what's your prescription to parents? You've got 15, 16, 14-year-olds to prevent this from happening. What's your
For me personally, like my kids, my son's 25, my daughter's 23, my youngest is 16. I've never told them not to go out. I want them to be able to socialize with their friends. I want them to be comfortable in that environment. Just if they decide to engage, if they decide to drink or to use, I want to understand why as a parent. I think when it comes to most parents, when your 15-year-old son comes home drunk or he's been smoking marijuana, it's like, who are you with? Where'd you get it? How much did you do? When's the last time you did it? How often do you do it? And they never ask why. Understand why. Understand why your kid has to put that substance in his body to spend 3 hours on a Friday with kids he's known since he was 4 years old. I mean, there's an answer there.
You think it's trying to feel the buzz? Do you think it's trying to fit in? Do you see a patterns among
No, yeah, I think it varies, right? I think certain kids use it for certain things, but at least we know why, right? At least we understand why. And again, I think we challenge our children in classrooms. We challenge them athletically. We push them. We give them the support they need to become the player or the student that they really want to be. I don't know how many parents out there really dive in socially and emotionally to make sure their kid is a star on Friday night in a basement in a house that's 2 miles away from your house with 15, 20 of his classmates or her classmates. Again, I don't know why, and times were different, but I wish somebody grabbed me when I was 16 years old and said to me, like, you have basketball figured out. like you kind of got this going in the right direction, but let's work on some other parts of your life. Let's dive in to some other areas that you're really not displaying to be very strong, right? Like I want to challenge you socially. I want to get to know you emotionally. I want to know what's going on in your home, what's happening in your house, how your family doing. So it's just kind of it's kind of switching up the approach a little bit. And I think we've done a good job over the years with that. I think in the last 10 years, the work I do in college athletics, things have changed, right? Like kids get emotional support, right? There's avenues for kids to go down if need be, where 10 years ago, that wasn't.
Yeah, no, we've made big strides with that. One thing I want to do is let the listeners know kind of what the state of mind is when you're deep in addiction, right? And the biggest scene that stuck with me on guard is when you were outside Boston Garden in your uniform, in your warm-ups, 15 minutes before playoffs, waiting for your dealer so you could get a hit. And someone who's not been through this would be like, well, can't you just wait? Or, couldn't you have done something else? But obviously the addict mind has its own thing going on. So taking you back to a dark place, but like tell people that don't know what that voice is like and what that feeling's like, where that's all you're thinking about.
I mean, honestly, I'll give this to you. I think, hanging outside the Boston Garden in the players lot, waiting for my friend to meet me so I can get some pills in my system so I can feel them. People often say to me, like, how did you ever play hot? And the reality is, like, I wouldn't play if I wasn't. My body wouldn't respond. So the answer to the question is yeah. Every time I played in a basketball game, 99% of the time I had drugs in my system, because if I didn't, my body wouldn't have responded to be able to play in that game. But I was playing in Istanbul, Turkey, and I was coming off a heroin, Oxycontin addiction, right? And I figured I had some experience in Europe. I found heroin in Italy. I'll be able to hustle in Istanbul. But, there's that movie, Midnight Express, right? That like you play with heroin, you play with those drugs in Istanbul, Turkey. Things can look a little differently. So that being said, I couldn't find it. So I had a buddy. I wired him $5,000. Send me $5,000 worth of Oxycontin. I want you to put it in the Boston Globe. I want you to tape them to the paper. I want you to fold the paper. I want you to put it in a FedEx, and I want you to ship it out to me. A week later, I get a phone call from my team, Galatasaray in Istanbul, and they said there's a package waiting for you at an office in downtown Istanbul. You have to go pick it up. And I'm saying to myself, oh, that ain't good, right? Like they want me to walk into a trap. But addiction, there's a chance it's not a trap. So I jump in my car and I drive and I walk in there and I'm sitting at the counter and I'm saying to myself, like, I have 2 children and there's a chance I'm never going to see them again. All for this package. Long story short, the woman comes out. I sign for the package. She hands it to me. It's wrapped in tape. So someone had opened it. And when I got in the car, I opened the Boston Herald, and someone in Logan Airport intercepted it and wrote a little note to me to get my life together. Because if he didn't intercept this, who knows where I would have ended up. But that's addiction, right? Like that's addiction. I have 2 children, a wife, family, and that Boston Globe and what's in that Boston Globe. At that time, I don't like to say more important, but the level of desperation I had, I was willing to take those chances.
How often do you think about that note?
Yeah, I wish I had it. I wish I had the note, because whoever that was, it was a special little note. And it was very to the point. It was like, get your shit together. Like, this is so disappointing. I watched you when you were a kid. I watched your whole career, and to see where you're at now, smuggling drugs, you need to get yourself together. But it was devastating, right? Here I am. I mean, I am in full blown addiction, withdrawal, sickness, and that was my answer. That was gonna cure me. The story is that I eventually found it in Istanbul, just like I found it in Iran, and just like we found it in China, and just like I found it in Poland. Unfortunately, addiction is a universal language.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me ask you this, Chris. If you were king of the United States, right, whatever you wanted to have happen, what would you do to help with the drug problem, the addiction problem we've got in the U.S.?
I would make substance use. I would make wellness. It would be the focus. It would be a core class in our school system, and that's a realistic move, right? Like obviously, I could sit up here. If I was king, I would get rid of all drugs. That's not. It's never going to happen. But what we can do is we can change the way we educate our kids, and we can change the way the investment we put in to their future, whether it's to mental health, to substance use. We don't do enough. We don't do enough. We don't focus enough. It's not, unfortunately, and even in 2024, addiction and substance misuse, substance use, it's all, we react to it. It's always a reaction. It's okay. Now what can we do to fix this rather than what can we do to prevent it?
Yeah, and yes, I love that. Maybe instead of doing another European history class, we switch that out with something that's actually tangible
Right.
and could be used.
Right. I mean, if you think
Yes.
about it, right? I mean, let's be honest. I think every person 45 and older in this country would say, gosh, these kids have it tough today. Like, can you imagine growing up with cell phones and social media and Instagram and Snapchat and all they have to endure? Not to mention the fact that drugs and alcohol, they're all strong, right? The
Yes.
substance, the potency is so much stronger than it was when we were children. But yet we don't do anything to kind of curb it and like help those kids with growing up in this generation. I've yet to walk into a school and say, we've been teaching wellness since first grade. Most curriculums throughout the country, health and wellness get implemented probably sophomore year of high school. And, it's too late.
When you talk about wellness, what do you mean specifically under that umbrella?
Just life skills, right? Coping skills, life skills, breath work, yoga, meditation, like all these things that nutrition, acupuncture, all these things that I do at my treatment center, right? I've watched in the last 7 years, I've watched the results. I've watched what acupuncture do for people, how it settles them, puts them in a much better space. What sleep, what nutrition can do, what physical activity, exercise, physical training, breath work, meditation, all this stuff that these kids should be learning right from the get-go. And then also given an opportunity to be vulnerable and transparent and be like, yeah, I'm not doing well today. Like, you should have a class that you can walk into from kindergarten to 12th grade. We have it. We have them, and we don't do enough for them. And like you said, you said it, and a lot of people don't really think much about it, but the word rock bottom, right? It's like, let's wait till rock bottom because then they can respond. And it's the only illness that we say, let them get as sick as possible before we treat it.
All right.
Like, let's let them blow their whole life up so they could finally say life's worth living. Like, come on, man. It's wild to me. And there doesn't have to be a specific rock bottom. And what I've noticed over the years doing this is early intervention. The younger the intervention takes place, the better chances we have at getting that person to where they need to be. That at that time of life or later in life.
So what age would you ideally start this? Would you start in junior high?
Oh God, junior high all day long. Listen, there are some schools, communities I go into, and I look at the kids in the audience, and I say to myself, like, these kids might be too young. But the truth is, if they are, then it's going to fly over their head. If they understand what I'm talking about, they need to be in there, right? And especially now in today's culture with vaping, with marijuana, with all these substances that these kids are presented with as harmless and flavorful and, black cherry and raspberry ice and blueberry mango. Like, these kids think it's candy. I'm walking into some schools and like 6th, 7th graders are getting caught in the bathroom with with their vape pads. Again, I don't think the curriculum needs to be focused on drugs and alcohol. I think we can empower them at a younger age and give them the skill set, the tools to cope with that as they grow. And I don't think we've done enough of that.
Yeah. Now, what's your personal like wellness routine to keep you sober every day? Do you ever
Yeah.
morning routine or some stuff you go through?
So, again, it fluctuates, right? So, there's times in my life where I'm not working out. There's times in my life when I'm not eating well. And those are red flags for me, right? Like to the people who love me, like, wait a second, like, where is he really? If he's willing, you know, to not take care of himself, what's next? Right. So I had hip replacement surgery. I was put in a bad situation for a couple of years. I had hip replacement surgery. Um, I was unhealthy emotionally, physically, mentally. Um, I had no real regimen of physical activity because of my hip. And I paid the price for it. It was the hardest 2 years. I've been sober for 16 years. 13 to 15 was the hardest years of my recovery. And that's because a lot of that stuff was taken out of my daily practice, right? I'm super faithful. I'm super spiritual. I lost my mom at a young age, and she left me that gift. What was that to have faith in that spirituality and the strength it brings you. I'm very much so a part of a recovery community. I'm surrounded by it on a daily basis. But that being said, right, it's me versus me in a lot of areas of my life. And lately, thankfully, I can honestly say I'm winning. I'm winning that right now. I'm winning that battle.
That's great, man. That's great. I'm glad to hear that. Let me ask you this. If 5 years from now, if everything keeps going as planned for your speeches, your recovery center, and it keeps going the way you want to keep it progressing, what does your life look like in 5 years from now?
Gosh, listen, if I would have put my life, if you asked me 5 years ago, I would have come up short, right? Like you know, my kids are older. I'm still sober. Honestly, the last year and a half, the focus has been therapy for me and being the best father I could possibly be. Uh, I was introduced to therapy a year and a half ago, and that form of therapy, IFS, it's something that's kind of opened my life up. You know, there was a time in my life where sobriety was enough for my children, and like, oh, Dad's sober again. Dad's got another year sober, but then they become adults, and they're like, wait a second, Dad, like we need to talk about some stuff. I like this, just staying sober is not enough. Like I want to kind of review some things. So I'm a one day at a time guy. It's a long way around to answer your question, but I'm just a one day at a time guy, and it's worked for me for 16 years.
Yes, absolutely. Last big question here. What's your favorite movie?
A favorite movie? Listen, I grew up on Cool Hand Luke.
Great one.
I grew up on Cool Hand Luke. My father would spend the day in a bar room drinking and make me sit in the living room and watch Cool Hand Luke with him. I probably watched it with him 150 times. I love Silver Linings Playbook. You know, um, that's a special one. I love Walter Mitty. If you know him, Walter Mitty's a star. But yeah, I mean, for me, unfortunately, the movie space has kind of been pushed out of the way, and it's TV, right? Everything's TV nowadays. And I'm a big British television watcher. So when you travel as much as I travel, it's a tough question because I'm constantly in the middle of some movie, some documentary, some TV show.
What's the British one you would recommend to people out there that might not know that genre as much?
There's a couple of them. The Bureau is a cool one. The Bureau is about the French intelligence agency. I love Ripper Street. Ripper Street is a period piece. So yeah, I mean, I'm all about subtitles and and diving into shows like that. When you like I said, when you travel as much as we travel, man, it's constant.
Yeah, I'd love it. Is there anything you want to discuss or talk about before we get off here that we didn't touch on in this the short time we had?
I'm good, brother. I'm good. Whatever you need.
Awesome. Well, where can people find you, Chris, if they want to learn more about your story or your recovery center or just, follow what you're doing?
Listen, I Herren Wellness, right where I'm at right now doing this interview is that's my wellness center. that's been open here for 7 years in Massachusetts. My foundation, Herren Project, for anyone who's struggling that needs support, whether it's financially or just jumping on meetings, is Herren Project. And Herren Talks is what we do all over the country in delivering this message of prevention, education, and recovery. So I'm easy to find. I'm not a big handle guy, just I'm more of a Google Chris Herren, and there's plenty of spots you can get me.
Perfect. And your documentary 30 for 30 is the most unbelievable one I've ever seen. Obviously, because we're the same age, played against each other, and just, knowing what you went through and just how you've recovered from that and
Sure.
trying to, prevent a lot of that from happening with a bunch of our youth in America now, I think is just very commendable. And I just appreciate what you're doing out there sharing your story, Chris.
What's interesting is that wasn't supposed to be the documentary. When ESPN decided to do the 30 for 30, they kind of settled in the basketball gym with me, teaching kids how to play who it had nothing to do with recovery, a little bit. And then right at the very end of filming, of 4.5 months of filming, I got a speaking engagement. And he said, "Hey, you mind if I take my camera with me?" And he filmed it. And we went from being, presenting one documentary to this in a 24-hour period. So it was an unbelievable risk. Guarded is something I'm unbelievably proud of. And the fact that, more important than all of it is that it's used as a tool for, at every treatment center in America, pretty much. So something that my wife and I underestimated at the time when we did it.
Yeah. Well, that's where I first heard your story, and I just found it amazing. Chris Herren, thanks so much for coming on the Prep Athletics podcast. Wish you all the best and luck, and good luck in the future.
Thanks, brother.